Take my lips and speak through them. Take our ears and hear through them. Take our hearts and set them on fire with love for thee. May I speak in the name of the living God. Amen. Happy Mother's Day, moms. Thank you. Thank you all for all the ways you have labored long, hard, and lovingly to raise up children in the way that they should go. A vital, necessary, unpaid blessing to us all. And we are all deeply grateful. When Mother's Day became an official holiday in 1914 in the United States, it became a tender celebration of motherhood. It was something personal and reverential. And believe me, I am all for being fussed over on a lovely Sunday in May by the family that I love. But it didn't start out that way. The earliest Mother's Day was called Mother's Day Work Clubs in West Virginia, and it was started by Ann Reeves Jarvis before the Civil War to teach local women how to care for their children properly. In 1868, Jarvis went on to organize a Mother's Friendship Day, where mothers gathered with former Union and Confederate soldiers to promote reconciliation. And then later, in 1870, our own Portsmouth resident, Julia Ward Howe, reeling as others were from the heartache and bloodshed of the Civil War, called for a Mother's Day of peace. She called on women to leave whatever is left of home and rise up for peace. And this is part of her proclamation. And this was held for about 30 years. Arise, all women who have hearts. Say firmly, we will not have great questions decided by irrelevant agencies. Our husbands shall not come to us reeking with carnage for caresses and applause. Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience. We women of one country will be too tender of those of another country to allow our sons to be trained to injure theirs. From the bosom of the devastated earth, a voice goes up with our own. It says, disarm, disarm. The sword is not the balance of justice. Blood does not wipe out dishonor, nor violence indicate possession. As men have often forsaken the plow and the anvil at the summons of war, let women now leave all that may be left of home for a great and earnest day of counsel as to the means whereby the great human family can live in peace. These early visions of Mother's Day were large. They were opportunities to empower women in the practical skills of motherhood, calls to women to take their part in the forming of the kind of world their children would grow up and live in. I'm not quite sure how it all ended up being about breakfast in bed. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but here we are. It's Mother's Day, and my mother is very much on my mind. She died 2 years ago, as many of you know. She didn't much like Mother's Day, truth to tell, seeing Hallmark cards as being the chief beneficiary. But she'd have liked Julia Ward Howe's proclamation for a Mother's Day of peace if she'd known it, because she signed virtually every congratulations card to new parents with the prayer, may their feet walk in the paths of peace. My dad, of course, agreed with that prayer, but he also wanted to bronze our baby shoes. You can imagine how that went over. With bracing directness, my mother told him it was tacky and sentimental, and no child of her shoes were going to be bronzed. Our mother was many things, but sentimental was not one of them. And I used to think it was mean, that she wouldn't let him. But now I understand. My dad had a more romantic view of our childhood, having missed a fair amount of it on military deployments and priestly saving of the world. Mom, not so much. And circumstances alter cases. I think that's what gets me most about what's happening right now with Roe versus Wade and what's happening in our country. It seems to me that for many, the passion for the unborn, for the beautiful abstraction of children, hidden, unheard, and unseen in the womb, isn't necessarily met with equal passion for the born, for the reality of wet diapers and hungry bellies and skinned knees, or for the actual hopes, hurts, and lives of the women who carry them. You know me, I can be sentimental like my dad, but I was hands-on raised by my mom, and she had a fierce resistance to the reducing of motherhood to some idealized abstraction. Anglican moral theology believes that circumstances alter cases. There is no one-size-fits-all that answers the question, the issue of abortion, or anything else for us. That is why the Episcopal Church is against, fully opposed in its strongest statement, to the legalizing, eliminating the choice for a moral decision. What we might want for ourselves as Episcopalians is different from what we regard as what's right living in a plural society, that the right to make that moral decision is not ours to make for others. Life, the Episcopal Church says, I agree with, and I think is complicated. Life is complicated. And it's always been this way, and we've always resisted it. Look at the gospel. The Pharisees say to Jesus, how long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly, yes or no. And Jesus doesn't. He won't. He says, I've told you, and you don't believe. Because you don't belong to my sheep, you've already made up your mind. If you can't see who I am as I do my Father's work of making the lame walk and the blind see, then nothing I'm going to say to you will help. When we demand black and white answers to complex questions, we seem like the little brother of my New Testament professor in college, who, as a child, tested his faith, such as it was, by putting a carpet square out in the backyard and telling God, God, if you exist, rain only on the carpet square. Now, God, failing to comply, was given a night to think about it. In the morning, God, still failing to comply, ceased to exist. We cannot reduce the mystery of Jesus, the mystery of life, to a one-size-fits-all test and determination, devised by me. A wise monk once said of such things, we want to turn these things into problems we can solve when they're mysteries we bow before. Life is complicated, and Jesus understood that as he dined with tax collectors and prostitutes and sinners. He never trafficked in the theoretical. Does anybody ever notice that? Because that really is striking me. He never trafficked in the theoretical. When he wanted to teach us something, he taught us a story. He relayed a parable about specific people. He made people wrestle with life, with ethics, with right and wrong, with whether or not they would help if their neighbor fell among the thieves, whether they would search for the lost until it was found, whether they would sell all for the pearl of great price. Jesus cared about real people in real circumstances. And he did it without judgment. How unlike him we are. You have had 5 husbands, he told the Samaritan woman at the well in John's Gospel, chapter 4, and the one you have now is not your husband. That's all he says about it. No judgment, just truth. Jesus was harsh only to the harsh, judged only those who judged. He'd have agreed with Maya Angelou, who said, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. Most of us are doing the best we know how to do. I remember Father Windsor, former rector of this church, telling a youth group Paul and I were leading, nobody gets up and says, I am going to live this day in the worst possible way. If there's something out there to mess up, I am going to do it. Most of us are doing the best we know how to do, and Jesus knows that. And God isn't through with any of us yet. So Jesus did not castigate the broken. He mended them. He did not avoid the unclean. He touched them. He healed the sick. He joined, and then he raised the dead. Jesus was and is Emmanuel, with us in all things. With us. And he's with us still. On this Mother's Day, while some rejoice and others are frightened, it seemed grace-filled that we have this story from Acts about the raising of Tabitha. Mother's Day began with, arise, all women. And we have this story of Peter raising Tabitha. Her name in Greek was Dorcas. Both names fittingly mean gazelle, because she literally leapt like a gazelle to help others. She was a woman who cared for widows, still among the most vulnerable people in the world. And perhaps she was a widow herself. There's no mention of a husband or children. We don't know. She is described as devoted. The word means literally bursting with good works and acts of charity. And she was beloved in her community, and the only woman in the New Testament to be called by the word disciple. The only one. Tragically, Tabitha became ill and died, and her community was bereft. And I can think of so many women in this community whose loss would mean the same to us. The widows who cared for her washed her body and laid her out in an upper room, and the disciples, knowing that Peter was nearby in a town 10 miles away, sent for him. Please come without delay. And what's the rush? She's dead. Where is she going, right? Peter got up and immediately went with them. And when he arrived, they took him to the upstairs room. And the widows stood around weeping, showing him the tunics and the clothes that she had made for them, and telling him how much she cared for them. In a world with so little time for women and children, it is striking that we see both Jesus and Peter drop everything to minister to widows and girls. Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell us of Jairus, remember the leader of the synagogue, who came to Jesus saying, my little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her that she might be made well. And there was a great crowd gathered to hear him speak. And his response is summed up in 5 words, and he went with him. And he took with him Peter, James, and John. And when he got there, he put everyone out of the room except his disciples and the girl's parents. And he took hold of her hand and said to her in Aramaic, Talitha cum, little girl, get up. Little girl, I say to you, arise. Surely Peter had this on his mind as the widows wept for Tabitha, as they showed him the clothes she had made, as they wondered what they would do without her. And he put them all out of the room. He got on his knees and prayed, and then he took her by the hand and said, Tabitha cum. Tabitha, get up. Tabitha, I say to you, arise. Saints, if you're feeling beleaguered this morning, if you're feeling joyful this morning, remember Tabitha. Remember the widows who thought all was lost. Remember Peter, who heard the shepherd's voice and followed him, bringing life in his wake, in word and in action, because at the end of the day, all that really matters, saints, is caring. Caring. Jesus is here sending people to take us by the hands and raising us up. How can we do the same? That mom Jesus is putting in your mind right now, how can you tell her, you're doing a great job and a vital job, and I see you, and I'm here to help you and care in a real way? That widow, that woman, how can you show her, Jesus sent me? Take my hand. Sister, I say to you, arise. Amen.